Hello, everybody. This is the Southern California housing market update for December 15th, 2020. It is actually my brother's birthday today, so give a shout out to Alex Mead. Anyhow, we are kind of in what I think a lot of realtors call the lame duck housing season, and that is that period from Thanksgiving through the New Year, through New Year's Day. And usually there's kind of this is kind of the slowest period of the year in general. And I would say that that might actually be true this year as well. But what's different about this year is the slowest period of this year is not very slow at all. And there's kind of still a lot of things happening in the market. And just to give you an idea of how not slow it is, we put up a new listing this week, located super cute house, very attractive, and received 9 offers in basically 2 days of showings. So, the market it might be in the lame duck season, but it is definitely not a very lame duck at all. Anyhow, let's move on with our stats this week and we can kind of go over what's sort of happening in the market. So the first thing here is our usual new listings. And, I just want to give people just a little bit of an idea here of what happened. Obviously, 2 weeks ago, we see this huge drop. What happened 2 weeks ago? Well, it was a holiday week, and we see that in our under $1 million category, as well as our $1 to $2 million category if you go back 2 weeks. I think what's interesting is just how much that's rebounded versus pre-Thanksgiving. I mean, we're really not off by that far for the 3 weeks preceding Thanksgiving. It was a little bit more of a drop here in our $1 to $2 million category. And remember, this is our new listings, and our stats are for Southern California, which for us means we use our Los Angeles and Orange County data for that. Now, if we take a look and we compare these numbers versus last year, I think that really tells you just how not lame duck of a season this is. We are up, over 400 listings versus where we were last year. And again, these are new listings on the market in the past week versus the same week in 2019, under $1 million in Los Angeles and LA counties. This year is definitely a far brisker market. Now, if we go to new escrows, right, if we were looking at the supply side of the market, this is the demand side. And again, we have kind of another thing where we saw 2 weeks ago, it took a dive. But what's really interesting is not only did it bounce back a little bit, but even between last week and this week, those new escrows have bounced back up. I think one of the things that might be happening, we've been talking about this so much, is that we are still in what is considered a supply constricted market. That means more houses would sell if there were more houses available. Now, I'm going to go off share for a second because someone made a comment to me and wrote to me and said, how is it possible we're in an inventory constricted market if there's actual inventory sitting on the market? Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because if you look at all the homes on the market, right, if you think of this as sort of a continuum, right, you've got maybe the top 10% of houses, those are the A houses, right? They will go up and it doesn't matter what's happening. They will find buyers very quickly. We all know those houses. We know when they come up on the market. And you've kind of got these gradations of houses, right, as you go down. Well, at the bottom end, the exact opposite, right, are these homes that no matter what is going on the market, they will struggle to find a buyer. And I think if you are a home buyer, if you bought a home before, you've certainly looked at one of these houses and you know these houses when you see them. And these are the kind of houses that they either need to be a really good deal or have some sort of special compelling proposition for them to sell. And a lot of times these houses don't have that, right? Like maybe they're a mediocre house that's way overpriced, or maybe they're even just an okay house that's way overpriced, or maybe they're a medium priced house that just has some glaring difficulty with it, right? Where, a good example would be like a house where a crime has been committed, a violent crime. That might be a home that's difficult to sell, right? That's been on the news. So, even when you have inventory available, that doesn't mean you always have viable inventory available. And I feel like that's the kind of market we're in, is we're in a very low inventory market, which is normal for December to be lower in inventory, but we started off with a really low inventory year already. And basically we have very, very little available on the market. Now, if we go back in here and we compare versus last year, again, we have stronger numbers of buyers than we did last year. Now, it's not quite the same relationship. And I remember last year we had absolutely a market that boomed and rallied, and yet there were no new listings. We were still very much in a favorable position. And if we look at our absorption rate here, and this is really sort of signifying our relationship of supply and demand, one of the things you notice is that that absorption rate is still right around 80%. It's in the high 70s. It's actually above 80% in our $1 to $2 million category. This is still very much a seller's market. So even though it might have been a little bit higher in the weeks before Thanksgiving and maybe a little bit higher over the summer, we are still very much in that zone where this is very much a seller's market. We're also seeing something else happening in this market, and I kind of alluded to it a second ago with those 10% listings that sort of no matter what kind of market we're in, they're going to sell quickly. And that is, we are seeing a market where there's a lot of compressed attention. So I feel like right now, the top 10 or 20% of the listings are getting 90% of the attention on the market. Those listings that are the most compelling are just having swarms of buyers kind of converge on them. There's not enough of those listings really to go around. And that's why we're seeing, definitely multiple offer situations happening on the desirable homes. Now, if we go to our pending list price, this is something I've talked about for a little while. And, in a rising market, this is really a great tool to use to see like what direction are things heading. But in a more stable market, this can sometimes be a little bit of a tricky statistic to nail down because it swings quite a bit from week to week, and it might be hard to get an idea of what's happening. One of the reasons why we like using some of these more alternative statistics is because this is based on deals. This is a statistic we can run on transactions that were started in the past week, meaning these aren't ones that closed the past week. These are things where people went into an agreement and negotiated in the last week. And that's something I would like to really talk about is the closing date of a property is interesting, but the negotiating date, that's really the date that's the most important to us. But again, this statistic has some issues with it. The first and foremost being, this is based on pending list price, meaning that this is what the home was listed at. This is not what the home went into escrow at. And when you're in a market where people are bidding over list price regularly, and I'm going to get to that in a second, this statistic can become warped a little bit. And if we look here, our list to close ratio is still hovering over 101%. Now, an important caveat to this is that this is the list price at the time that it closed. So meaning you could have a home that say was priced at $1 million, it sat on the market, they dropped it to $900,000, and then it got bid up to $950,000. That would show as an over list price sale because it closed at a price higher than what the last list price was, not necessarily the original list price of the home. But when you see this number over 100%, it means that on average, homes are being bid over their list price. Now, if we go back to this pending list price for our $1 to $2 million, again, you see this one has pretty violent swings in pricing. It was up last week, it's down this week. It seems to kind of follow this sort of a pattern. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult to glean information, and we're not really comfortable drawing conclusions when we have a period where things are so regularly above their pending list price when they actually close. Now, this is something, and I don't want to rush through this. If you watched our video last week, and I hope you did, I highly recommend watching them. One of the things we try to do is create some continuity week to week and really try to tell a story of what the market is doing. And one of the things we noticed last week was that days on market bumped up in both our $1 to $2 million and our under $1 million categories. And that's really noteworthy when that happens, right? Because the idea is there's a couple explanations for that. One of those explanations is that the market is definitely slowing and getting soft, right? And that's something we want to watch out for because days on market is kind of one of those early indicators that demand might be changing. But another explanation for days on market going up is that buyers are they're scraping farther down in that barrel of listings. If we have that continuum of listings, right, they are willing to settle farther down that priority list, maybe homes that have been overlooked and have sat on the market a little bit longer. Also, the other thing that we notice is that tends to happen in kind of this seesaw manner sometimes, right? Where the number of listings on the market, people start going after those old listings because there's not enough. Then the next week, a bunch of new listings come into market, sales drop, and we see those sales show up the next week, right? It's kind of like a caterpillar. The head moves forward with new listings, then the back follows when those listings go into escrow. And so if we go back to this graph, and I think we can really see what's happening, I question, hey, let's look out. Maybe this is the beginning of a trend, but let's take a look at what actually happened week over week. So I made a note that we've been seeing these kind of, especially in this under 1 million, where it blips, days on market goes up, and then the next week it falls. It blips up, then it falls. It blips up, then it falls. And we saw a blip upward, but look, it has actually fallen to where it was 2 weeks ago. We see a bump up here a little bit, but still, these are very, very low days on market. We are under 30 days for our under 1 million category, and we are just about 40 days for our 1 to 2 million. I do see a trend of these going up a little bit, and I think that's to be expected as we head into the fall. I would say the market is slightly softer now than it has been, which is great news for buyers. However, there is such low inventory that it is still very competitive, especially if you're a buyer going after those prime listings. You know, those ones with the pretty pictures that everybody is after. Now, before we continue, I do want to talk just a little bit about affordability, because I think that's sort of a statistic that we watch switch, kind of change around week to week. And I think it's really important when you're talking about affordability to sort of look in the grand scheme of things and really understand, what are you getting for your money? And I feel like I harp on this every single time. So if I'm being repetitive, I apologize, but I think it's something important to understand. And also to understand, because I think this affordability really is driving a lot of our price growth and why we are in such an active market in December. So let's bring up that affordability graph here, and I can show you what I'm talking about. So this is our payment on a median priced home. And we track this month to month, and then we show what it was in the past week. So you can see we did see a bump in December over our November numbers. That is mainly driven by price growth, not by interest rate growth. And then this past week, it's eased to around 90%. And really, we've been just kind of centering around this 90% number. This is really what's been driving our market through the summer. We actually had some really cheap months there in the fall. It's bumped back up a little bit. But when you see that homes, at least our median priced home in Orange County, when you see that that is below where it was 2 years ago, I think that's really telling at why we're in the kind of market that we're in, because it is a good opportunity payment-wise. I mean, this is essentially deflation of home costs. And, I think we rarely get to say that in the Southern California market. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. You also notice we've started a new video series. We're going to come out with them about every 2 weeks. And that is our podcast, where we release those both as audio on the normal podcast sources like Apple and Spotify. But we're also releasing a video version on YouTube. So we actually have our first episode is up there. Look for it. It's called Making Mortgages Sexy, Kinda. And definitely take a watch or a listen on your preferred channel. And of course, as always, questions, comments, we love them. Stephen Mead for Domicile Real Estate. We will see you next week or later on this week if you watch our first time home buyer specific market update where the numbers are a little bit different.